Can we just take a moment to acknowledge the sound design team for Mushoku Tensei? Usually when we all watch anime, we focus on the visuals or music added for individual scenes within a story, but often people, including myself, forget to mention voice acting, which we had last week with Paul's forgiveness scene, and sound effects to add more life to scenes within an anime. So that leads us to the current discussion of the latest episode of Mushoku Tensei. The way the telepathy scene was showcased to the viewer was something I personally never seen done before. It conveyed raw emotions of annoyance with the sound effects added in when Roxy's fellow villagers tried to communicate with her telepathically. I've always going on about the lengths this anime will go for immersion, and what better way to represent that than a second or third language thrown into the series. So let's back up for a second and talk about a lot of hidden details that people will definitely miss if they don't have a refresher to episode 9 of Mushoku Tensei. So back in that specific episode, we get introduced to Rui and how he will help Eris and Rudy travel throughout the Demon Continent. Upon their early days of travels, we have our characters come upon Roxy's childhood village. We even get to meet her parents for the first time. For the audience, we learn of how the villagers are able to speak telepathically, but it really never dived into it that much. However, from that moment, it makes you wonder if Roxy was capable of this too. However, she potentially could only use telepathy with people from her village, because if she could use telepathy with others, she might have done it with Rudy so far. So that's why it wasn't ever really dived into when she was training Rudy as a kid. Still, this was an early sign to how Roxy's village actually was, because if you go back to these scenes, you'll notice there isn't a noticeable chatter in the background. Now, I know this seems like common sense. Why would we hear people in the background in Roxy's village? Well, I would like to point out that every time we go to a village, town, city, whatever, within Mushoku Tensei, we hear background chatter from characters. The people in the background, like for instance in an inn, you can hear them talking, communicating. You feel the life. For instance, the world actually feels, lived in. So this lets us know the villagers in Roxy's village don't even know how to speak the demon language, or at least only a select few does. Because the only people that actually spoke in Roxy's village to Rudy was the elder and Roxy's parents. I gotta respect that level of foreshadowing and hidden details thrown in for those that rewatch the anime. It's something I always love about rewatching anime. Like for instance, let's say when I rewatched ReZero, you can always notice things that you never noticed the first time around, with how like animators and all that, and the story writer really throws in these things that you would never catch ever until you really go back and rewatch certain scenes. You'd be like, man, that blows my mind, just the level of setup that's been prepared since the very beginning. And since we're on the topic of things that you could definitely miss if you don't have a rewatch, I would like to point out these two villagers right here. You see one that is noticeably pregnant. This is from episode 9 of Mushoku Tensei. And you fast forward to the latest episode, episode 18, and you see these same two people, but instead the person is no longer pregnant, which basically showcases, a lot of time actually has passed, and that, really what Rudy said was indeed true. Over a year and a half has passed, and, the world is continuing to move on. I do like that sense of feeling that time really is moving, and it isn't just static and just staying still throughout the entire anime. The characters are growing and aging as they journey. And on top of that, we now know why Roxy's mother's demon language sounded so scuffed in comparison to her husband back in episode 9. She hasn't had to use the spoken language of, the demon language in 20 years since Roxy left. She only spoke that language to communicate with her child, Roxy. It's absolutely brilliant storytelling, in my personal opinion, that all I can do is just sit back and praise it for what it really is. Now let's move back to present day with episode 18 of Mushoku Tensei. We now understand why Roxy left her village. She was basically the deaf/mute kid in her village. She couldn't communicate with anyone, and because of that, she felt like, an outcast. I respect how much detail was thrown into this with very few words, by the way. I feel like one of the biggest lessons this episode teaches us is that sometimes actions are more powerful than words can ever be, and you can learn more about a person from their actions than what they actually say. Because if you look at, let's say, Rudy's conversation with Rui at the beginning of the episode, you can maybe see that Rudy doesn't like his father at all, Paul at all, and that, they really don't have a good relationship. And even Rui himself mentions, like, you shouldn't badmouth your father like that, but Rudy clarifies, like, no, that's just how we are, and, their actions with each each other kind of tell a lot more than their words, and I love that. It basically shows that sometimes a relationship can be very complicated, and just depending on how you interact with the individual is what really matters and how you'll know how they actually are. But anyways, let's get back on to Roxy. We need to take a moment to acknowledge how the mother and father tried their hardest to learn a second language to talk with their daughter. It's like learning sign language. Also, I don't think the villagers are rude or anything, but they genuinely cannot speak because their language is actually just telepathy. Seriously, I cannot praise this anime enough this week. I really do love Mushoku Tensei so much. It's easily moving up into one of my favorite Isekai of all time, and I hold a lot of strong feelings towards this, similar to how I feel about Re:Zero. To the animation, the art, the music, to the voice acting and sound effects, there's not a single area that feels inferior to the other at all. They all come together to make a truly wonderful anime, and I guess one thing we can take away from this week's episode is that family is extremely important, and you really should enjoy your time with them while you still can, because one day, sooner or later, you won't be able to talk with them again, which is why Paul and Rudy's forgiveness episode was so important. If they left it at that, for instance, the dispute, the argument from episode, 16, and they never spoke again, Rudy went on his travels with Eris and all that, and they never spoke with Paul ever again, then I really think that Rudy might not ever have seen his parents ever again. He never would have taken the initiative to go out of his way to, see his parents, to see his family or anything, and try to communicate with them, because it would just be left in a very awkward spot. And his last words to his father would be an argument. This is why anime can teach us a lot, honestly. I know people like to meme and say you can't learn anything from watching anime, but I 100% disagree. You can learn a lot of life lessons, and this week definitely showcases that. That you really can take a lot from anime and just learn how, you can get some certain values from it, of how to treat people, or sometimes to respect family or friends or whatever in a certain way. I really do love anime for that, and once again, this episode really just kind of hammers that in. But anyways, I'm also happy to see that Roxy now knows about Rudy's situation, so she will journey trying to find Rudy's other family members instead, because she has 100% confidence that Rudy will be A-okay, because, he is a part of the dead end, and, he's very competent. I love that entire scene, basically showing Roxy has 100% faith in Rudy, and he will be A-okay. And a few other things I do want to mention, and I could be wrong about this, but when Roxy was actually doing the healing scene for one of her fellow villagers, it sounded to me like she was very short with her, chant. Her chant seemed very short in comparison to how it was back in Season 1 of Mushoku Tensei. Now, or I guess the first time, not Season 1, but the first half, it feels very short, and I could be wrong about this. I'll have to actually go back myself and look at it, but I really do believe that, Roxy's chant for healing was just so much longer, and that she has definitely improved upon it a lot. I do wonder if that's a little hidden detail that, was thrown in with this episode. I wouldn't really put it past the story writer and the animators of Mushoku Tensei from what they've done so far with the immersion, so that is something to actually think about. Now, I do want to talk about the Rudy stuff with Eris and all that, with them on the boat. Since I've been heavily about, sound effects and all that, or sound design in general when it comes to this episode, I want to take a moment to really acknowledge the beauty of just the rocking of the boat, and just the sounds of creaking, and the water, the storm, and everything. It really just gets you into the vibe of that the ship is moving, and that it makes a lot of sense why, Rudy and Eris are feeling seasick, because if you were on a boat that's just rocking non-stop, you'd feel like you have no ground underneath you, and you're just constantly moving. You would just probably eventually get sick, and I do like that. I do like that little layer and detail, and just showcasing that, seasickness just happens, and that it's probably miserable until you finally get your foot back on real land again. It's a nice little scene, really, and I like how we got to see them kind of just chilling on the boat till their next destination. Now, one last thing I do want to mention before I, wrap up the overall video is that the beginning sequence of this episode throws in a very subtle detail that I think many might glance over very quickly, and I almost glanced over it myself, actually, while doing this video. It's that, at the beginning, we are met with a random individual that is just looking like a traveler that wants to express his skill with his swordsmanship or fighting style, and I feel like this is a perfect representation of probably wandering travelers that really want to showcase showcase their skill and get a lot better. That this is how some people improve in this world, is by just randomly asking people for a sparring match / challenge. I like that little detail. It's nice, and it opens up more about the world and how people really do journey around to better themselves or their style of fighting. But I think I'm going to leave it at that. If you enjoyed my video and I gave you any form of entertainment, then, please consider leaving me a like on the video. And if you want my content to appear in your YouTube feed ever, then please subscribe. It does help me out a lot as well. But I love you all, and be safe. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much everybody in this community that continues to leave comments. I love the discussions, but be safe, everyone. Chibi out.